Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It depends of your position around the world. Welcome to the first session of Networking Fridays in 2023. This session is organized by the Marine Biodiversity Online Observation Network, MPA, and the group of the Earth Observation Biodiversity Observation Network, GeoBON, and the Air Center. Since April of 2020, the Networking Fridays have had more than 350 of panelists, and we have a lot of registration and participants in our Networking Fridays from 145 countries. Please stay tuned and follow the Air Center news to see the next Networking Fridays. So I'm going to introduce a little bit myself. I'm Luz Paramio. I'm working on the Regional Science and Technology Fund of the Azores government. I'm in this moment coordinator of programs and projects in the FRC team and a member of the directive board. My previous life was dedicated to the marine spatial planning and marine protect areas. Also ocean governance in general. I'm an base oceanographer, but I work a lot for 20 years with these maritime issues, especially here in the Azores, that for us, the marine protect areas in the middle of the Atlantic is very important for our conservation and from our ocean. So in this case, in these sessions, we have the honor to have the protected seas. We have Virgil Zetterlind, Director, and Deirdre Brannigan, Communication and Community Engagement Liaison. They represent the ProtectedSeas work, and they are going to present a little bit about their work, and especially the tools that the tool that they are developed for the platform and for data regulatory and the legal frameworks around the world. So in this case, I'm going to pass the floor to Virgil Zetterlind. That Virgil has a very interesting curriculum and work in more than 200 of countries. So please, Virgil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Luz, and thank you everyone for this opportunity to talk to you this morning. I'm Virgil Zetterlind. I'm Director at ProtectedSeas and Chief Technology Officer, and our team has been working for a long time on Navigator, and actually I'm going to hand it off to Deirdre to tell everyone about it. Please, we welcome your questions and feedback, so please use the Q&A or the chat, and we'll try to have a good discussion at the end of the presentation.
Thanks, Virgil. I really appreciate the introduction. And I know our team is delighted to be here today. And I'm the Communications and Community Engagement Liaison for ProtectedSeas. And today I'll be talking about the organization, the database that we offer to support better understanding of marine protected areas, and how the tool that I'll be showcasing has tremendous value to marine spatial planning on a variety of fronts, especially as it relates to 30 by 30 efforts around the world. So one of the reasons that ProtectedSeas was created was to develop tools that would answer the questions and the complexities related to this seemingly simple question of where are the oceans most protected. And in essence, we are tackling the problem of solving what can really be a black box of regulatory protections for the oceans. So ProtectedSeas is coming at this from an innovative approach and making this available in a way that it never has been before. So I suspect that most everyone on this call with me today can lament how exceedingly difficult it can be to discern the answer to this previous question. The layers of regulation and their contribution to conservation can be so very complicated. And so when we think about demystifying marine protected areas, what we're really trying to do is answer that simple question of, where are the oceans prohibited? Where are they allowed? And, in many places, multiple use is really the underpinning of ocean management, in that in the US and elsewhere, marine protected areas tend to resemble national forests where extraction is allowed versus national parks where everything is prohibited. And so really, Navigator was created to understand conservation through a regulatory lens. So Protected Seas is a data-driven business, and we are dedicated to facilitating the transparency of ocean regulations across the globe. And it's well documented that oftentimes various governments are resource constrained in maintaining databases of their regulations and creating electronic versions of the jurisdictional maps. And so as a result of that lack of capacity, Protected Seas stepped in to fill a niche. And we have heartfelt gratitude for our donors that allow us to do the work that we do and to be able to provide this service. So Protected Seas is a California business, like I said, and it's important to note we're not an environmental advocacy group of any sort, but rather a neutral purveyor of data. So once Protected Seas was founded, the next step was hiring a unique team to tackle this issue. So there are a multidisciplinary team of attorneys, GIS specialists, and software developers, all bringing a diverse background and specialties to this immense effort. The next step was aligning with an amazing partner. The MPA Center is an operational office under NOAA's National Oceanic Administration, Atmospheric Administration, and the MPA Center is an office under the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. And so this has been a really positive and productive partnership, and we work closely with them. We've had a formal memorandum of understanding for the last 8 years. And it's this partnership with NOAA that serves as a conduit of communication to inform, the Stewardship Atlas and President Biden's executive order on 30 by 30. So I'm here today to really highlight the work that has been completed over these last 8 years by this dedicated team and is now available for consumption. So we'll dive into the capabilities and discuss it. And so in terms of this slide, a quick overview. This Navigator database is a comprehensive database of ocean regulation information. And we are publishing 100% of that for the planet's marine protected areas. And the Navigator database contains a wealth of information related to marine spatial planning needs, including those you can see here in bullet number 2. And just to put a fine point on it, we have regulatory data for over 24,000 marine protected areas in more than 200 countries and translated into 22 languages. And so this is how we really answer that prior question of where's the ocean most protected, by looking through a lens of understanding the regulations as a first step. And I'd like to point you to a paper from February of 2021. And this image on the left is from that, and that goes into more detail than I will today. Again, so the image on the left here from that paper, it identifies the various attributes within the database. And so Protected Seas staff will chase down as many regulations as reasonably possible, such as those listed here, like no anchor zone, overflight restriction zones, ship speed restrictions, special use zones, yada, yada, all of these other regs when possible. It is important to note, though, that many of these attributes are not well documented in various management plans, especially when they fall under another agency's jurisdiction. So that could point to the need for perhaps better practices when drafting management plans, so that they mention all requirements within a boundary rather than just from a siloed perspective. So I often get asked the question, well, what is Navigator? What isn't it? So Navigator is a dynamic, compelling, applied, iterative database. And so it's a regulatory data-driven tool. We're not promoting any particular outcome. It's agenda-free. It's the best available global regulatory database, and it's transparent with direct links to everything that I'll show you here in a moment. So it's not a black box, and yet, you know, it's also not perfect. And we're always looking for more information and room for improvement. And Navigator requires judgment as well. And so it's one tool. In many ways, I think of it as the Swiss Army knife in the toolbox, but I'll let you decide. So understanding area-based ocean management is so complex, as you know. And in most cases, the regulatory seascape consists of many legal instruments layered on top of each other, often without any particular knowledge. And I love the imagery that our partners at NOAA made here on the left, which really highlights that, in that it's not unusual to have anywhere from 6 to 20 overlapping areas in any particular site. And so, listen, if this were easy to do, everyone would have this publicly available data, but it does take tenacity to find. And as I'm sure you're aware, it's not uncommon for, you know, resource protection staff or federal agencies charged with managing certain swaths of the ocean to not easily have this information available at their fingertips. And so Navigator is essentially an online encyclopedic wealth of information. It can be used for MPA assessment and other things. The image here is a site about 26 nautical miles offshore the Golden Gate Bridge in California. And most people think about this as just one marine protected area. However, when you dig into it, what you can see here is that there are, you know, 10 managed areas, a dozen fishing gear restrictions, and then another 10 other restricted activities. So I have the code of federal regulations just as the image there on the bottom left to really drive the point home that this is really, rather than digging through the code, you can go to ProtectedSeas Navigator and get just a boatload of information. So here I've clicked on this just as a quick screenshot of Davidson Seamount offshore of the California coast. And what you can see is once you click on any particular area, you can see the restrictions, the area name, the managing authority, and all other information, all with direct links to the regulations. And so this is hard work, building a data resource with this international scope. And we rely solely upon legal codified regulations. And we do occasionally help solicit help from on-the-ground researcher assistants who can help us unearth cryptic code. On bullet number 4 is where you can find the link to the site. And I wanted to just show some infographics, how this can really be an invaluable tool when discerning both broad scale and fine scale areas. And so when I look at this infographic based on the data pulled from the Navigator database, I have musings like, wow, how did the East Coast of the US beat the West Coast with regard to more highly protected areas, especially given, you know, California's environmental ethos? That's a surprise to many people. And I also wonder, as do others, about the equity or lack thereof of having, you know, 52% of the Pacific Islands out by Papahanaumoku and other areas protected. You know, that makes up 99% of the 25.2% that's highly protected from fishing in the US. And so this is just an illustrative example for how can this data best be used and what types of messages are trying to be conveyed. And, you know, having this overlay of data is both, you know, really fascinating and insightful. We have also information for 30 by 30 efforts internationally. And, you know, yes, so you can find that information here. And we're always trying to amplify the capabilities of the database. We could always use a bigger megaphone. And so that's one of the reasons that we're delighted to be on this presentation today. So We're also letting decision makers and policymakers know about the information contained in the database. This time last year, we had written a letter to NOAA on the proposed Chumash National Marine Heritage area. And so this is an area that has some unique attributes and has been special to the cultural history of the Native tribal community. And so we let them know that, and the next several slides are granular in their detail, but we just thought it would be helpful to say for this proposed area, you can see currently that there are 41 areas of regulation, and this helps unravel the regulatory complexity so that decision makers can have a little more detail around what's currently being managed. And then, obviously it's up to them. Another thing we thought was useful was to understand the fishing regulations. And so we provided this again to NOAA. And, within the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries, that's a program that typically does not manage fishing directly. But this area does have a suite of a suite of sensitive species that are biologically diverse. So we thought it would be helpful to share information that we have on where bottom trawling is prohibited, which you can see here, or restricted. After the public formal comment process for that potential designation, we received requests from a number of national and international conservation organizations who are looking at diving into the regulatory detail from a California sanctuary-centric lens. And this is another illustrative example of what can be done with this tool. And here you can see for this, 12,000 plus square nautical mile area of coverage offshore of California, that there's currently 216 areas of various regulation. So I also want to talk today about the level of fishing protection, which is an objective measure of the in-place legal restrictions on extraction. And you can read more about this in the marine policy paper, but essentially a score is assigned to each area based on the analysis of the restrictions on marine life extraction and coded on a 1 to 5 scale. Again, I always think it's fascinating to be able to overlay the scope of fishing regulations and then depict them in such a way for easy visualization. And so for here, you can see on the west coast of the US for the exclusive economic zone, the data that we show here for less than 1% is highly restrictive. We also have in this image, it might be difficult to see those highly restricted areas, tiny little red dots. Those are the marine protected areas that were designated by the state of California. And you can also look here for in the legend for the national marine sanctuaries offshore of the West Coast and take a look at how they are, similar or different to, in terms of level of fishing protection score, the adjacent areas. And so for the 30 by 30 discussion, we were also asked to do some analysis on California state waters. And here you can see that 12.1% is the percentage of state waters in MPAs that are highly protected from fishing. And that's from combining those two highest level of fishing protection categories, the 8.7 and the 3.4. And so, yeah, that can be helpful when looking at various things. We also did recently get a request from NOAA's National Marine Fisheries Service as part of their Pacific Management Council for the committee meetings, and they were curious about bottom trawling regulations within the US EEZ in the areas that they regulate. And so they didn't have functionality like this at their fingertips, and so they requested that we pull something together to depict that. And so we're always happy to partner with various groups who are doing analysis. And this database can be useful to integrate into other analysis to provide a more complete picture of marine protected areas. Let's see. Again, this has been a heavy lift. I've sometimes asked my colleagues on the team, like, okay, if this were one full-time employee or grad student trying to pull this information together, like how long would it have taken? And their estimate is anywhere between 38 and 42 years for a single person to do it. And so again, Protected Seas is not agenda-driven in any way. We're really using our Silicon Valley roots to solve some of these problems and offer solutions to challenging conservation issues. And of course, our hope is that people find it valuable and it expedites analysis as it relates to 30 by 30 efforts. We're also always seeking partners who are interested in innovative solutions to conservation challenges. And recently we linked up with an Australian company called Decky, and that's an app that you can have on your phone. And when you're on the water, you can drop a pin and then get a suite of information around the regulations that are allowed in that particular area. So boaters can see if they're in a no anchor zone, if they're in a no fishing zone, anything else that they're curious about. And so as I've walked you through today, the Navigator tool is adept at answering the why, the where, the what, and the how. And we can envision many uses of this database. And I have a couple of suggestions for how this can be useful in bullet number 2. And I know there are more. We're always getting questions about like various integrations that we can be doing for things like this. But it's certainly helpful for NEPA evaluation, MPA creation, sanctuary nominations, evaluating conservation potential, vessel traffic lanes, emergency response efforts, and other things. And so I recognize that there is some debate over other effective conservation measures, but it may be important to note the spectrum of contribution for various areas that have conservation benefit. And Protected Seas has that data for the US and for Canada, including 4,500 areas for 1,000 MPAs and 3,500 fisheries management areas at the state and federal level. So that can often be helpful to various people who are doing analysis. I think it's important to note, as we always do, that just because there's regulations in place does not mean that there's compliance. I think all of us on this call recognize that that would require a certain level of naivete to think that that was actually the case. But knowing the regulations is really the first step to understanding the baseline of the protection levels for various activities. And it does not tell the more difficult enforcement story. Combining regulations with compliance information would be a natural extension of Navigator, and we're always looking for partners who can provide that lens of enforcement and data. Also, I should point you towards, we have another marine policy paper coming out, and it discusses in part how standardized levels of protection based on regulations can be really helpful in evaluating marine protected area effectiveness. So you can look for that. Oh, I included this slide just for levity during my monologue here, and just wanting to say that we had gotten some questions from a colleague at King's College in London who was working on MPA management issues in the Irish Sea, where there are 198 designations across 112 sites. And so she was like, oh my goodness, Deirdre, this is the horrendogram. It's what we lovingly call this. But I think her point is a good one in that this looks silly, but it's not wrong. And it can be really complicated to find some of the answers to these challenging regulatory questions. So one thing that's great is that all of the people on the call today can log into your favorite MPA and see the comprehensive scope of what is allowed and what is prohibited. And the Navigator database, it really facilitates this transparent worldwide analysis of the regulatory framework for our Blue Planet's marine protected areas. And we're not hiding this data. We really want you to use it. And it's our belief and others that without a solid understanding of the regulatory baseline as that foundation, it's not possible to assess conservation measures. That's the building block upon which other assessments are laid. And we offer this compilation of data freely and encourage wide uses. It has taken many years and intense effort by staff to create this platform. And as a scientific courtesy, we do appreciate when people are using it to attribute the data to protected seas. That's one of the metrics that we use to see how valuable it is. So we always appreciate those. I just wanted to say we've got a lot of great collaborators who are always saying nice things about the Navigator tool, and it's great to work with interested partners to solve these conservation challenges. So this is the contact information for myself and our director, Virgil. And again, Protected Seas is not an advocacy organization, but really rather seeking to accurately document the reality of regulations for MPAs and fisheries, and offering this in a way that governments haven't been able to thus far. And so we're always interested in engaging with all stakeholder groups. And I thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. We look forward to your questions. And at this point, I'll be passing it along to Virgil, our director, to really help that conversation and get it going. So I'll stop sharing my screen here.
All right. Thanks, Deirdre and Luz. Should I just go into the questions?
You're on mute, Luz.
Thank you. Apologize. Thank you, Deirdre, for the presentation. Thank you, Virgil. The work is amazing because, as you know, we have all people that works a little bit with the ocean governance at different levels, not sectoral level, but in more integrative way, not only also conservation, but also for blue economy, have these difficulties as the orondogramma appears, to understand and to collect all these kind of legal frameworks that the MPAs address and are related with MPAs. So thank you so much. This is amazing work. I have some questions, but the chat is open. Is open for the people that want to ask for our speakers. Okay, so in this case, I would like to ask you, or to make a reflection with you, that here in Europe we have a very different view and approach to the ocean, especially from the marine protected areas, because we have in transregional frameworks, some of them related with the conservation organization and entities. And I would like to understand how we can involve your approach and your work with the work that in this moment is being developed in Europe. In particular, as the Air Center is the coordinator, maybe Jose can tell us, the Air Center lead in this moment the ocean mission. That is one of the big questions about the ocean health and the ocean restoration for the several maritime basins. So we would like to know and to see how we can alignate work here in Europe, and how we can contribute also for other regions, ocean regions around the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Luz. So yeah, we're always eager to work and sort of collaborate efforts, not only just, you know, at the personal level, but at the data level. So we are working with United Nations Ocean Data Information System, for example, the ODIS, to have our data indexed in the ODIS We're working on a protected area metadata sort of sharing pattern that will allow the scientific data that might be going to OTIS, so biodiversity data, species surveys, to be able to sort of search and link that to any protected areas that might overlap. So that's something we're actively working with the OTIS team, and hopefully we'll have a presentation at the IOC Ocean Data Conference in March with the OTIS team about what we're doing there. So we are working different ways to make the data behind Navigator more accessible through other platforms and projects.
Thank you so much, Virgil. We have today we have our other question from our participants. We have the special participant Frank Muller here with a question, and it's also related that just we speak before. How can science best work with managers using this tool to evaluate what science and scientific information is needed to plan, manage for conservation and sustainable development in this case? Thank you, Virgil.
Yeah, so again, we are, we definitely have sort of the public map that Deirdre had that is really good for sort of casual, just trying to find out more about a place. We are on the Esri spatial platform if you're working in a project using that to sort of aggregate your data or analysis. Also have an integration with the SeaSketch platform, which is often used for marine spatial planning, all the way down to the community level. So we're working directly with University of California, Santa Barbara, and SeaSketch team for their next generation product, which I know they're feverishly hoping to have ready here in the next couple of months. And again, we really come at this with the regulatory expertise and sort of a mapping expertise. So we always welcome feedback from the scientists side of, are there other pieces of data or other ways to present or provide the data that would be helpful? So we definitely recognize we're not experts in marine science. And so part of why we love opportunities like this is to make connections and to see how we can better tailor what we provide to help them.
Thank you, Virgil. I have here Joanna Soares is chatting also. I don't know if Joanna wants to complement anything here.
No, thank you. No, I'm okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Joanna. Thank you. Regarding the other question is from Nicole Fourier, and she said that to what extent does the UNEP database on protected areas inform/contribute to the reference base for the data being displayed?
Yes, I assume you're referring to the World Database of Protected Areas from IUCN. So we research our areas sort of from original management authority sources at the national levels typically, but then we cross-reference to the WDPA. So within Navigator, any area that we've matched to areas being reported to the database of protected areas at the UN, we provide the cross-linkage. In a few cases, we use the WDPA boundaries if no other boundaries exist or are findable. But our preference is always to use the original management authority's spatial boundaries, as we feel that's most likely to be the most correct.
Thank you, Virgil. We have also the Professor Isabel Sousa Pinto that make the question about the governments. Do you have any requests from governments outside of USA, please? USA.
So, I mean, we're still in the we just last week sort of wrapped up our initial global review and finishing all the countries. So generally speaking, we're sort of, we've been a partner with NOAA for 8 years. We definitely look for more direct engagement now with governments worldwide as we have the data available. I will say we've worked significantly with non-governmental organizations globally. So we've been working with Law of the Wild, who's very active in Africa. We work with ACOPA, which is in El Salvador, Pro Natura and others in Mexico. So we definitely, I will say we did work directly with MedPan in the Mediterranean and building the Mediterranean MPA data. So yes, our goal is definitely to be global in scope and not just US focused.
Thank you so much. Now we have one participant that requests some clarification about the acronym ODIS.
Yes, so that's Ocean Data Information System. That's a program in the UNESCO International Oceanographic Commission program. And I think the simplest way to think of ODIS is sort of a search engine for ocean data. So like Google is the search engine for the web, ODIS is really trying to be a smart search engine for everything to support the data to support and information for the UN Ocean Decade Program.
Thank you so much. We have now one question that is very interesting because this is the objectives of the Networking Fridays, that is establish bridge between the different people around the world. We have Muriel Lux from Mercator Ocean International, representing the Copernicus Marine Services that are very interested to establish a bridge with your navigator in order to provide access to MPA information to our users. So she requests to keep in touch in order to work together.
Yes, Muriel, we look forward to further conversations.
Very nice. We have also Stephanie D'Agata that refers the stakeholders' involvement, because we have all legal frameworks and governance level, but maybe in the implementation, all of us in all regions, we have these difficulties to monitorize the improvements around the implementation. So regarding the stakeholder involvement, could you explain a little bit if your data, if your platform has this question, is monitoring this question?
Yes, so we do capture the date of establishment whenever it's identifiable in our review. We did not try to go sort of back in time to collect a history for each area, but we do intend to go forward in time. So we do track changes in the database, and we do annotate when we've updated or changed information based on new regulations or new management plans. So again, we're at the very beginning of what we hope is a very long-term data product that's kept up to date, and as time goes on, and particularly with a lot of hopefully upzoning of protections and in addition to new areas globally to meet global targets, we'll be starting to build that history going forward. And we do have partners also wanting to track those changes to also make sure that no one's going backwards. So there's history in terrestrial conservation that highly protected areas on land often get those protections get reduced over time when sort of the public attention is away from the initial founding. And so there's an interest to sort of watch the oceans and make sure as we implement strong protections, those aren't rolled back quietly in future years.
Thank you, Virgil. We have some question here in the chat that is very similar one that we have in the WhatsApp. In this case, Stephanie again asked about did you find information of MPAs was more difficult to address and to retrieve in developed countries. And we have also a similar question in the WhatsApp, that is, do you have any partners in other parts of the world, and as could be Africa?
Mm-hmm. So we are working with some groups in Africa, but we're always, again, interested in additional partnerships. The US actually is a very challenging country, even though the data, generally speaking, is available. It's the volume of the data, and that the management itself was built over from multiple agencies with very little coordination. So it's a very, putting sort of the total picture together is very complex. Versus sort of as a counterexample, Mexico, the management of Mexico's protected areas and fisheries is remarkably straightforward. And so and there's very little overlap in Mexico of the different areas. So again, they were coordinated when they were built so that MPAs and fisheries coexist in sort of a more planned way. I will say, we do have challenges, that will continue. We were not able to find regulatory data for Cuba, Venezuela, or Nicaragua, very challenging countries for political reasons. In China, we, thanks to work published by some other groups here recently, we were able to source the regulations, but China does not publish boundaries for any of their areas. So in China, we're doing something somewhat unique, that we're going to just sort of map the reported center of the areas and then their size or square areas reported, because they're right now we have there's no available data to really try and do a proper boundary that we're aware of. So one of the things we're working on as we sort of wrap up this global coverage are country-specific notes that sort of say what we found, what we didn't find, where we could use help from partners to fill in missing information.
Thank you so much. Regarding Frank Muller again, about your contribution to the United Nations Ocean Decoding programs, like is the case of the Marine Life 2030, are there specific activities that could be planned or initiated according this frame? Can you talk about possible benefits and outcomes of something to cover these targets?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that's on my mind really since the UN conference in Lisbon last July is a lot of the efforts around the digital twins, the digital ocean twins, and that are very looking at bringing in the scientific data and the biodiversity data. And I think it'd be very interesting to look at bringing in regulatory data to the digital twins, and again, how that might hopefully improve sort of the interpretation of, under the different modeling scenarios, what's more of the human factor, or the, do the regulations, under climate change scenarios or different human threat scenarios, how could the regulations just help make, I guess, more interpretive sense of what the ecological conditions tell us?
Thank you so much. Regarding other question that we have here is from Nicoline Fourier again, and she's clarifying and giving us some links regarding the database of South African database that cover the conserved areas, protected conserved areas, and all the layers that could be involved in the marine protected areas. So this is only clarification. I don't know if we have any other question to say.
No, again, we appreciate in this, and yes, we found that is often the case in most countries, that our first step is sort of for our legal team to start to understand the management frameworks in organizations, and then our mapping team also sort of finding out who are the who's doing the gazetting, are there public databases available. We actually, about 15% of the areas in the database, our mapping team had to draw boundaries from the legal code because digital boundaries were not available or provided. So that's also an interesting, in our data, when you look at an area, it'll actually give a boundary source citation. And in many of those, it will say, digitized by Protected Seas team from legal description where no digital boundary was available.
Thank you so much, Virgil. We have also Jose. Do you want?
Yes, also Frank will join us as well as a panelist, maybe has some comments. So, thank you so much. Fantastic presentation. And we already had met before, and I knew a lot of this information, but I'd like to go to a very practical case. We have still some 10 minutes. It's important that we could lead the way for others to connect with you. As Luis said, I'm coordinating now the Blue Mission A is a coordination and support in action for the implementation of the EU mission Restore of Ocean and Waters by 2030 in the Atlantic and Arctic. And we will be focusing a lot on restoration, preservation of marine and coastal ecosystems and biodiversity, and with a great focus on MPAs. We will have to build a database. We have a lot of information. We will have to build a database of information related to MPAs. As I said, we have some information, but we have to work a lot to get. And I hope this could use an example, for example, like Mercator or something like that. What would be the first step for us to start working together?
Sure. So
we just gave the first step now with this,
right.
presentation, but what would be the follow-up, let's say?
Yes. Yeah. So follow-up, typically, we like to do a simple 1 or 2 page sort of partnership agreement that's typically, not very binding, but just lays out, the mutual interests in working together, and just, gives us a nice, and gives a nod towards co-promotion, obviously, of our efforts and partnership. And then really, typically after that, a technical call with, in this case, probably more our mapping and database team, with your mapping and database team to say, well, what is the best way to, if you're interested in bringing the MPA data in for those regions, if you're on a platform that can dynamically pull that from one of our existing services, that can be very straightforward. And the beauty with those connections is any updates we do sort of automatically appear in your system. If you're doing something more desktop, which a lot of people still need to do analysis, we can definitely export raw data in the format of your choice. Again, our legal and mapping teams are always available. There's, always interpretive questions, usually early on, about, what do these data fields mean, or, interpreting the data correctly. So again, I'd like to think, that we're a pretty hands-on and accessible team in terms of building these data partnerships.
Yeah, thank you. But one last question before I pass to Frank is the following. What are the costs? Because somebody must be thinking that will cost something. How much would I have paid? Would I have to pay for example? This is a very important question for people, basically in Africa, because these services sometimes are provided to African countries, but they must be paid.
Yeah, so again, the Navigator data is Creative Commons by attribution license, which means fundamentally it's free. We just ask that if it's being used, it be properly cited and sourced as from Protected Seas. We do, again, generally without cost. We try to provide basic technical support and support for integrations. Obviously, we're not a giant team. We're really a pretty small team. So if there was a major project where the request was more for significant engineering hours on our part, we would work together on a more formal proposal and then try to find who the appropriate funder might be for that. But generally speaking, our goal is to maximize the reach of Navigator and hopefully avoid a lot of costly duplication of effort. We know again that the mapping MPAs and the regulations is fundamental to a lot of these different global activities. If what we have is already mostly what someone needs, we'd much rather their limited funds be spent on some other aspect, because we know again that funding for ocean conservation is very low compared to terrestrial navigation or terrestrial conservation and others. So we definitely understand everyone is operating on limited resources, and our goal is hopefully that Navigator helps free up resources of other organizations to concentrate more on their specialties.
Okay, good. Just Frank, sorry, you can turn on your camera, but before we leave, before I stop, there's a question from Suhu. I guess it's Zachary Suhu from Benin. He's the director of IROV in Benin, and he's asking if you have any capacity building for students or management.
We do, we do try to, if there are students interested in doing some projects, we definitely have in the past tried to put together like small analysis projects or things on our list that we hadn't got to that are scoped to someone's education, university level. So yeah, definitely happy to reach out. On the management side, I guess I'd say right now we don't have anything exactly like that, but we more on the legal or mapping side, if there are students, we'd be happy to try and scope projects.
Yeah. Okay, so I pass back to Frank and Luis. There are some interesting questions. People are warming up now with the questions. So I'll leave with Luis and Frank.
Thank you, Jose. Frank, do you want to take the floor?
Well, not necessarily. I just want to thank Virgil and Deirdre for participating in this on behalf of MBON and Marine Life 2030. I think that there are some really good questions in the chat and the Q&A, and it's important that people know how to engage with you, Virgil and Deirdre. For example, the question from Montenegro on whether if a particular group or government doesn't find a specific area in your database, how can they work with you directly? And I think that clarifying that for everybody around the world is very important. So
yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, so we try to make that as easy as possible. So anyone can email info@protectedseas.net. We'll go to a number of the team right away and we'll respond. We actually on the map in each area, it's like if you click in the Montenegro EEZ, there'll be a feedback button, which if you click that will open a little web form again, and that'll go right to 3 or 4 team members, so it doesn't go into a black box or a chat bot. It'll go to one of the team right away. Again, our primary pass through Europe was about 3 years ago, so we do know that there's some updating to do. And again, that's going to be a big focus this year. Now that we sort of wrapped the initial review of all the countries, is going back to those that we've done the longest ago. We do try to keep it up to date in real time, but again, without local partners pointing us to gaps, that's that imperfection Deirdre pointed to. We try and make it, we try and keep it the best available, but we do realize that it's not perfect, and feedback is really helpful for us. Yeah,
I think that's great, Virgil. And just to put a fine point on it, like we said, we're not local content experts for the entire ocean. And so we really do rely on people who know particular areas very well, especially if there is not well-known adjustment or some cryptic code that, might be handwritten on the back of a PDF that's found at a governmental office. We've encountered things like that as well. So again, we're always looking for ways to improve it and definitely rely on people who have that local knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Regarding also the questions, we have two applications of the platform that is very, very interesting. One is from Isabel Sousa Pinto, and say that a very interesting idea of linking your data with the digital twin of the ocean to help forecast and understand what we find regarding biodiversity change. How is the link with DT2 working at the moment?
Yeah, so at this point, we would love connection to the appropriate people working with digital twins. Like I said, Lisbon was my first big exposure to the concept, and definitely an interest, but we haven't done any direct work yet. So again, I've had to keep my team focused last year on completing round one of our global review. And now that they're sort of coming out of that very heads down work, this year is our year to sort of really focus more on these connections and partnerships. So if anyone on the call has recommendations on who we would talk to with the different digital twin efforts, we would love those introductions.
Thank you. I believe that Isabel could be a very interesting link also for this initiative. We have also some question from Saratu Usman Ibrahim. It could be possible to pass to cover the inland water environment?
So right now we only cover coastal and ocean, and that was other than the US Great Lakes, which is this weird, from a US perspective, regulatory area, in that it's in the US, the Great Lakes are treated as if they're oceans for the most part. The framework, I think, is very, very, would be generally applicable to inland protection as well. And that's an area we would be happy to consider adding inland protections, particularly if we had help with partners in sourcing the regulations and boundaries. So we chose specifically not to concentrate on that initially because the global targets, particularly 30 by 30, are also very focused on the ocean. But certainly I think the platform we have would work for any water-based protections.
Thank you so much. We have already answered the question of our participants. So I don't know if you want to conclude with some small ideas, you say? We cannot hear you.
Virgil, you cannot hear me? Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so Virgil and Deirdre, if you can say, a final word before we close this session.
Well, again, I just think it was such a delight to be invited today, and you have such an impressive network. I think you had said over 150 countries had registered for the presentation today, and that's really part of the effort. As Virgil alluded to earlier, it's been 8 years of intense effort to build this tool, and now we're at the point of unveiling it and being like, ta-da! Please let us know how we can use it, how we can partner, how we can be of service. That's one of our primary goals. And so this has been a really great forum for that. Hopefully everyone on the call today has our contact information. And like we said, for data, you can always use that info@ProtectedSeas email. But yeah, we're just really delighted to have participated in this call. Virgil, was there anything that you wanted to add?
No, I would just again reiterate a great thank you to the MBON network, and also thank you to all the work your members are doing. This is the oceans are the common heritage of all of us, and it's going to take all of us to really make sure they're sustainable and healthy for the future.
So, Luis, you can close the meeting.
Okay, thank you so much for your contribution. It's a very interesting tool. I believe that we have here in our site, in this side of the world, in Europe, a lot of potential cooperation bridges, especially with the digital twins and the missions. Of course, it's very important to be involved at the international level, because marine spatial planning is running very quick. So this is a crucial moment to have this platform. So congratulations for the excellent work. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jose, for the opportunity to stay here with these panelists. And thank you to our center and Frank Muller MBON for the invitation. Thank you so much. See you. Stay tuned for the next Networking Friday. Thank you.